I was standing at the kitchen counter, slowly stirring honey into a cup of chamomile, letting the steam rise against my face. Lyle's home always ran a few degrees colder than mine, both in temperature and temperament. Still, I made myself useful warming tea, folding blankets, keeping the children occupied. I had arrived the night before to help while Verena traveled for a speaking engagement, or so I was told. The quiet was broken by the violent slam of the front door. I flinched, the spoon clinking sharply against the ceramic. Verena's voice came next, cutting through the house like a blade. "Where is it?" she shouted. "Where's the necklace?" Before I could even ask what she meant, she appeared in the kitchen doorway. Her hair wind-swept her lips, painted sharp red eyes wild. The emerald necklace, the one from Lyle's grandmother. "It's gone." She held up the jewelry box, its velvet lining empty. Her hands shaking. "You were the only one in that room. Don't play dumb." I stared at her, the cup still in my hand. My mind struggled to catch up as if her words didn't match the scene around me. My coat still hung by the door. I hadn't even opened a drawer in that guest room. Lyle followed behind, breathless, his voice tight. "Mom? Is this true?" He didn't look at me, only at the box, then at his wife, then back at me. And that's when I knew. He wasn't asking, he was accusing. The cup slipped slightly in my grasp. "You should go," Verena said, stepping closer. "Now." Lyle's voice was low but firm. "Just pack your things, Mom. This isn't okay." I set the tea down. I didn't take another sip. The words hung in the air like smoke, ugly, choking, and impossible to escape. Verena stepped in front of Lyle, her finger pointing toward the hallway. "You've been staying here too long anyway," she hissed. "It's not a nursing home, Eunice. You're not entitled to everything just because you wiped his nose 30 years ago." Her voice grew louder, shriller as she advanced. "You come here, sleep in our guest room, eat our food, act like this is your space. You think just because you're the mother you can do whatever you want. But you're just a parasitic old woman who doesn't know when she's worn out her welcome." I opened my mouth, but the words caught in my throat, like stones. The kitchen had turned into something foreign, the light overhead now stark and unforgiving. My heart beat so loudly I could hear it echo in my ears. "Verena, stop," Lyle muttered, but it was too late. The damage was already running down the walls like water. "I didn't take anything," I whispered finally. Finding air. "Why would I take something I was going to give her someday?" Verena scoffed. "You really expect us to believe that I turned to my son?" "Lyle," I said, my voice cracking. "I didn't. Just stop." He cut in, eyes not meeting mine. "Please, just pack your things. We'll figure everything else out later." There was no later. I could feel it. I stood still for a moment longer, as if time would rewind if I waited long enough. But it didn't. Lyle reached toward the staircase. "The suitcase you brought is in the hall closet. I'll grab it." I watched him disappear and reappear within seconds. He placed the bag by my feet as if setting down a delivery. "Here," he said. "You should go." The silence that followed was worse than the shouting. I took the handle of my small floral bag, the one I brought every time I stayed for weekends to help with the kids. It was light, already half empty. Just 2 sets of clothes, my reading glasses, and my travel-sized toiletries. As I walked to the door, I passed the photo of our family on the wall, the one taken during Thanksgiving 2 years ago. Lyle stood between me and Verena, arms over both our shoulders. I remembered the warmth of that day. I had made the pumpkin pie. I paused at the threshold, but no one looked back. No one offered a coat or an apology. The door opened, then closed behind me with a dull, final sound. Not a slam, a seal. I stood outside in the cold, holding a bag and nothing else. No umbrella. No place to go. My hand rose to my chest on instinct. fingers wrapping around the relic at my neck, the locket that had never left me not once in 40 years. Inside it, the past waited, quietly, and in that moment, I felt the wind bite through my coat as I began to walk with nowhere to land. But memory. The wind stung my eyes as I walked. I didn't know where my feet were taking me, but each step away from that house felt heavier than the last. My grip tightened on the suitcase handle, and I lowered my gaze to the pavement, letting the rhythm of my steps drown the noise inside my chest. Memories crept in, slow and uninvited. Lyle was 5 when he caught pneumonia. I stayed up 4 nights straight, holding a cool rag to his forehead, reading him stories he couldn't keep his eyes open to hear. He clutched my shirt with his tiny hand, whispering, "Don't leave me." I never did. When he and Verena bought their first home, they were drowning in debt. I took money from my small retirement fund to help with the down payment. I never asked for it back. I just wanted to see him settled. Safe. He said thank you. She didn't say anything at all. Verena had once pretended to like me. She complimented my roast chicken and even asked for my pie crust recipe one Thanksgiving. I gave her my mother's handwritten card, smudged with flour and love. She took it, folded it, and never returned it. I never saw her bake that pie. With time, her kindness cooled. Little things at first. No greeting when I arrived. Sighs when I offered help. Closed doors. Tight smiles. I thought maybe I had done something wrong. I folded their laundry, watched their children ironed Lyle's work shirts. I stayed quiet. Maybe I thought if I gave enough, they'd always make space for me. But giving had turned into dissolving. I didn't notice when my voice stopped mattering, or when my presence turned into a background object in their well-decorated home. I only knew it now when I'd been removed without hesitation. A car honked as it passed, and I flinched. The cold deepened. I pulled my coat tighter and reached for the locket again. There had to be somewhere I could go, someone who still saw me. Then I remembered Marjorie. The sidewalk blurred beneath my feet, my fingers stiff on the handle of the suitcase. Houses I had once visited for birthday parties and baby showers passed by like strangers. Lights glowed behind curtained windows, but no one looked up. A porch light flickered across the street, and I thought for a moment that someone might wave. They didn't. I turned down Sycamore Lane, drawn by muscle memory more than intent. My legs ached, but I didn't stop. Not yet. The ache in my chest pulsed deeper than the cold. I could still hear Lyle's voice in my head, tight, low, practiced, as if he'd rehearsed it, as if it was easier for him to see me leave than to look me in the eye. I passed the Myers house. Their dog barked at me through the fence like I didn't belong. I had brought them soup once when Linda had shingles. They never returned the pot. My pace slowed as I reached the small brick house on the corner with the peeling blue shutters. The porch light was already on. Marjorie had always left it that way. For visitors, for hope. I didn't want to knock, didn't want to explain. But my hand moved before I could second guess it, and my knuckles tapped the door like a question I wasn't ready to ask. It opened before the second knock. Marjorie stood there in her apron, her hair pinned back, eyes gentle but unreadable. She looked at me. Really looked like someone studying a wound they already expected to find. "I've been waiting for you," she said, stepping aside without asking a thing. I stepped in. Warmth, cinnamon, and old wood filled my lungs. I didn't speak. I couldn't. She closed the door behind me with a soft click and took the suitcase from my hand. Her touch said more than any words. I followed her down the hallway, past family photos, past quilts folded neatly on the back of chairs, to the room that had once held her late husband's books. She turned back only once. "I made chamomile," she said. "It's still warm." And just like that, I breathed again. Marjorie handed me a mug and didn't say anything else. She sat across from me, knitting in silence, as the warmth of chamomile worked its way through my hands. The living room was dim lit by the low hum of a single lamp and the ticking of the wall clock. It was the kind of quiet that didn't demand anything, not even gratitude. She left me with a folded lavender blanket on the edge of the guest bed. I recognized the stitching her hands had made it last winter after her arthritis flare had passed. I curled it around me, the scent of clean cotton and cinnamon lingering in the threads. Still, I couldn't sleep. I lay there, eyes open to the shadows on the ceiling, listening to the old pipes murmur behind the walls. I thought rest might come eventually, but my body stayed tense, as if bracing for someone to barge in and drag me out again. The shame clung tighter in the dark. I reached beneath the blanket and closed my fingers around the locket at my neck, pressing it into my palm. It was warm from my skin. I flipped it open with care. On the left, the faded photo of Miguel, smiling faintly, his hair still thick and dark. On the right, a curl of Lyle's baby hair, golden and soft, flattened now with time. I had clipped it myself when he was 9 months old, just before his first fever. They used to be the two people I would have died for. I held the locket against my heart until the ache quieted, even if just slightly. In the morning, I would pretend to know what to do next. Tonight, I only had this silence and the memory of being loved without suspicion. The sun filtered in quietly the next morning, as if it knew not to wake me too harshly. I sat at the small desk in Marjorie's guest room, with a notepad in front of me and a pen that barely moved. The tea sat untouched, the steam long faded. I had been writing for days. Fragments mostly. Sentences that started but didn't finish. Names. Dates. Things that no longer felt certain. It was the only way I could stop myself from unraveling. To place what happened on paper made it feel like it existed outside of me. I was halfway through scribbling what Verena had said. "You're just a parasitic old woman," when the image came to me. It didn't burst in, not like a memory usually does. It crept up like a breeze under a door. Faint, dusty, but sharp when it finally arrived. The camera. After the break-in at my old house, I'd bought a small surveillance camera online, one of those no-name brands with clunky software. I never trusted the cloud, so I set it to save clips to a micro SD card. I placed it on the dresser in the guest room, angled just enough to cover the jewelry cabinet, not because I ever thought someone would steal, but because I'd promised Miguel I'd be cautious. I hadn't thought about it in years. Not until now. My hands moved before my mind caught up. I pulled the black tote from the bottom of the closet, the one I always carried on longer stays. I dug past receipts tissues, a roll of peppermints. My fingers landed on a small plastic case wedged inside the zippered pocket. I opened it, and there it was, the card. It felt too light to matter, but I knew. My heart began to pound, not with fear, but with something else. Something I hadn't felt since the door shut behind me. I closed my notebook, slid the card into my palm, and stood. It was time to call Mr. Davidson. Mr. Davidson's office hadn't changed in 15 years. The carpet was still the same muted blue, worn thin beneath his desk, and the same brass clock ticked softly above the bookshelf. He welcomed me with a nod and a firm handshake, then gestured to the seat across from him as if we were picking up a conversation we'd never finished. I placed the tiny memory card on his desk without a word. He raised an eyebrow. "What's this? I need to show you something," I said. My voice surprised me with its steadiness. He plugged it into a small adapter and inserted it into his computer. A few clicks, a loading screen. I kept my eyes on my lap, unsure if I could watch what I already suspected. But then the video played, and I did look. There she was, Verena, in my guest room, standing at the jewelry cabinet with a look that didn't belong to someone caught off guard. She didn't hesitate. She opened the drawer, pulled out the velvet box, and flipped the lid. Her hands moved quickly, practiced. She took the emerald necklace, held it to the light, then slid it into her coat pocket. No fumbling, no pause. A few seconds later, Lyle appeared in the doorway. He didn't say anything. He didn't stop her. He just looked long enough to understand, long enough to act if he'd wanted to. Then he stepped away. I swallowed hard. Davidson leaned back in his chair. He studied me as if trying to gauge something deeper than my words. "This could win in court," he said quietly. "Are you ready for that?" I took a breath. My hand instinctively rose to the locket around my neck. "I don't want revenge," I said. "I want my name back." He nodded, his voice as gentle as it had been the day he helped me sign Miguel's will. "Then let's begin." And just like that, the first thread of myself began to return. The courtroom was too bright. The air felt dry and recycled, the kind that settles in your throat and stays there. I sat beside Mr. Davidson at the front, hands resting on my lap, fingers curled lightly around the edge of my locket. I didn't fidget. I didn't cry. The judge called for order, and the monitor flickered to life. There it was again. My guest room, my velvet box, Verina's fingers, the necklace. No one made a sound as the footage played. The moment Lyle appeared on screen, a murmur passed through the room. He stood in the doorway in silence, then turned away. The clip ended. Still silence. Verina's lawyer looked down. She shifted in her seat, then stood with a jerk. She was protecting the estate, he said flatly. She believed Mrs. Calderon was showing signs of mental decline and was acting in the best interest of the family assets. The judge raised an eyebrow. "That is not what I saw." Verina stood then, her voice cracked. "I didn't think it would go this far," she said. I thought if we made it look like she was confused, it would be easier. For everyone. And your husband," the judge asked. Lyle stood slowly. His suit looked too large. His voice was barely a whisper. "I thought maybe she wasn't well," he said, eyes locked on the floor. "She kept mixing up dates. She forgot where she parked once. I didn't want to believe she'd steal, but I also didn't want to believe Verina would lie." The judge leaned forward. "But you saw her do it." "Yes." I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I sat upright, spine straight, the locket warm against my skin. No tears came. Just a quiet calm, the kind that arrives when something irreversible has finally been named. The judge called for recess. Mr. Davidson leaned in. "This is going well," he said softly. I nodded once. As we stepped into the hallway, the clatter of doors echoed behind me, and I felt something loosen in my chest that had been locked there for far too long. The courthouse doors swung open behind me, and I stepped into the chill of the afternoon air. It felt sharper than it had that morning, but I kept walking one slow step after another, toward nothing in particular. "Mom." The voice cracked behind me. I stopped but didn't turn. "Mom, please." His footsteps closed the distance. Then silence. When I glanced down, Lyle was kneeling on the concrete, suit-wrinkled palms pressed to the sidewalk, like he needed to anchor himself. "I didn't know it would go this far," he said. "I didn't know I just thought you were confused. That maybe you needed help." I looked at him then. His face was thinner than I remembered, the lines deeper. His eyes, Miguel's eyes, looked smaller, somehow. Ashamed. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't mean to lose you like this." I crouched beside him slowly, knees protesting. I placed my hand gently on his shoulder. "I love you, Lyle," I said, voice low, firm. "But love doesn't mean going back to where I was erased." His shoulders shook beneath my hand, but I didn't pull him in. Not this time. I stood. The locket rested just beneath my collarbone, warm with the heat of my skin, and I pressed my hand over it as I turned away. I didn't hear him follow. With each step forward, something in me closed gently, finally. Not out of bitterness, but because I'd seen what choosing myself felt like. Marjorie was waiting for me down the block, hands in her coat pockets, eyes steady. I walked toward her, and for the first time in a long while, my steps didn't hesitate. The tea had gone lukewarm, but I still held the cup close, letting it anchor me. Marjorie sat beside me, silent as ever. A bird darted past the porch railing, wings flashing once in the sun. My phone lit up again. More messages. Apologies in too many words. I let the screen go dark. Instead, I opened my journal and wrote slowly, the ink bleeding into the page. They tried to bury me in shame. I grew roots instead. I closed the book, breathed deep, and looked ahead. The rest of my life was already beginning.